So I've done a lot of thinking about hope over the last 20 years or so. On the outside of the carpet in the rug in the Oval Office, President Obama placed a quote from Martin Luther King. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And this, over the course of the Obama presidency, this became a part of, again, sort of in a modern way, a part of our political vernacular. And I've thought a lot about that. I've thought a lot about sort of hope as a political slogan. One of the interesting things about like when a president uses a phrase is it gives permission for his staff to use the phrase and insert it, because it's like the president has used it, this has been okay, now we could use it like everywhere. And so like if you search like the White House archives, that the phrase, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, is in, frankly, like an obscene amount of materials. My favorite is the president used the phrase at a state dinner for Nordic leaders. I'm a big fan of the Nordic states, not sure that they're at the very tip of the spear of bending the arc of, and so these things become sort of routinized, and the sting can and the meaning can be taken out of them. What's important to recognize is, King was using the phrase borrowing from a minister nearly a century before him, I'll just read very briefly the context for what he was talking about, because I think it's really, really important. So the pastor who used the phrase said, the arc bends toward justice. Things refuse to be mismanaged long. Jefferson trembled when he thought of slavery and remembered that God is just. Ere long, all America will tremble. And then it was a century later that King used the phrase, first in a small Christian newsletter, and he said, those of us who call the name of Jesus Christ find something at the center of our faith which forever reminds us that God is on the side of truth and justice. Good Friday may occupy the throne for a day, but ultimately it must give way to the triumphant beat of the drums of Easter. Evil may so shape events that Caesar will occupy a palace and Christ a cross, but that same Christ will rise up and split history into AD and BC, so that even the life of Caesar must be dated by his name. And then King writes, yes, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The way I talk about hope in politics is that it's very dangerous to place your hope in politics. But when your hope is placed in the right place, you can hope for a great deal. And I think that we ought to have great hope for our politics, because hope is about possibility. We need to be able to look at our civic life, and especially because we're the ones who make it up, see potential, see possibility. I think the place where we err is by investing our hope in politics, and that is a place that can lead to great dissatisfaction and great disappointment.
Yeah, so I think this is resonant with where Michael ended. My favorite definition of hope comes from a Jewish theologian, Maimonides, and he wrote, that hope is belief in the plausibility of the possible as opposed to the necessity of the probable. Right? Which is similar to this idea that, we can accept that the arc of the universe is going to bend a certain way, the necessity of the probable, right? Or we can try to make the possible, right, the arc of justice, more plausible. And I feel like the work that we all have to do is to try to figure out how do we make the possible more plausible, knowing that there are these forces that pull us towards the probable, right? I'm a social scientist, like we believe in probability theory, and so I think there's that question, and I think in this particular moment, she says, like, here's another quote. There's an African proverb that I'm probably going to misquote, but it says something like, the child who doesn't feel loved by his village will burn it down to feel its warmth, right? And so I think if you look at the data, right? I'm a political scientist. One of the trends that we see in American politics is that there's increasingly a gap between people who feel like they're subjects and objects of the political system, right? That there's a small group of people that we think of as the political class who feel like, they can help shape this spectacle of politics that we all have to consume, right? And most everybody else feels like we're just objects, we're pawns in a game that someone else is controlling, right? And if you couple that with other trends around economic inequality, around people's perceptions of corruption, all these other things, and increasingly you have more and more people who feel like they're being excluded from a system that isn't really created for them. And so I think I think about hope in the context of how do we recreate the capacity for all people to feel like they can put their hands on the levers of change. And I want that to be for people I agree with, people I disagree with. Like, I want everyone to feel like they can play a role in this work of forging a common life together. And I think we have a better world if we all do that, and then we can deliberate and debate about what the life is that we want. And to me, that's like hope. This is how I take what you're saying, where you don't. If the mistake is to put hope. The mistake is to not locate the hope in us, right? Like, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Like, the hope has to come from the people who are going to learn together, how to reclaim a public life that we can all be a part of and that we can all help shape. And then that becomes the source of hope itself in a way. Yeah.
I think that's so important. So there is a logic of politics operating, that politics is about sort of the ultimate, like, extinguishing of your political opponent. So you hear this in our political rhetoric all this time, like a permanent majority. We're going to keep the other side from having influence on your life, and it makes our politics not about sort of this shared project of co-creating our communities together, but this existential threat. Now, I think one of the dangers we have is the way that this logic has been popularized and embraced as an inevitability, as just sort of like, well, this is just what our politics is. And so one of the great roles for hope, one of the great things that I think Hahrie provides in her work, is this imagination for the possibility that our politics can be about something different. But like, if you look at recent like Gallup and Pew research, like it's not the increasingly it's not that the American people think politicians are failing to live up to the ideal. Increasingly, it's that the American people just have a low estimation of politics and what it's for entirely. So that's like a whole different kind of problem. And what happens is when the expectations are lowered, the incentive structure for politicians to rise above those low expectations becomes very difficult. And the permission structure for politicians to sink below those low expectations becomes all the more plausible. Yeah.
This is the vulgarity.
Yeah, right. I mean, so much. I mean, it's tolerance for corruption, tolerance for just belligerence, tolerance for using the levers of government for self-aggrandizement. All of these things, increasingly, it's not. This is abnormal behavior, increasingly people are like, well, at least we know it's happening. Like this is what we always thought was happening, and at least now people are finally being honest with us about it. That wasn't always the American expectation, and there are still that debate is ongoing. I don't think it's settled. I think there are still people who think that politics can be a noble, but we're losing that, and I think we need to break into this vicious cycle of rationalization that we're in. I think we share a joint appreciation for things like participatory budgeting, and which is a very nerdy thing, but I feel like, but we have to actually make systemic changes that re-spark a public imagination for politics as being something that everyone has access to and can participate in.